Hi, and welcome to another edition of the Trustcast show. And we're happy to have with us Matthew Konecky. Welcome to the show, Matt.
Thanks for having me, Zane.
So today's guest wrestled at Indiana University, is a purple belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and surfs before court. But his real fighting happens inside Palm Beach County courtrooms, where he's built over 200 five-star Google reviews, defending people on the worst day of their lives. Matthew runs a criminal defense and personal injury firm that just got featured in a Sun Sentinel investigative series, and we'll get into why. So I usually like to write down my first opening question. So you took a client charged with attempted first-degree murder, a life felony, and got it reduced to a misdemeanor with the record sealed. Walk me through what that case looked like from day one.
It was tragic. I actually had the opportunity to speak with this client prior to him getting arrested. And most of the time that really doesn't ever happen. This was a very unique situation. My client was a licensed security guard. He was licensed to carry a firearm. He was also a barber, and he was on his day off just going to the barber shop to just pick up his personal belongings that he had there and talk with some of the people that he knew in the area. I'm going to give you the cliff notes of the story. He
Yep.
was hanging out with his friend, and he had his car on, and they were listening to music. Out of nowhere, someone stood up, jumped into his car, and his friend said, "Hey, that guy's stealing your car." He was, he was carrying because he was licensed to carry, so he walked over. The car drove towards him, then away. Client fired one shot into the air, and then as the car sped away and then turned back towards him because there was no exit, my client was trying to get his car back and was standing there. Then pointed the gun because the car was coming at him at full speed. Decided he wasn't going to get run over. So he went to the side. The vehicle slowed down, and my client wasn't sure what he was going to, what was going to happen. The car was slowing down. He saw the person inside reach over for something, and he didn't know, and he fired a shot. Florida has a stand your ground law. And so my client did everything that he was supposed to do in this situation. He stayed for law enforcement. What happened was that the car then all of a sudden slowed to a stop and then actually crashed into another car because he did strike the other party, and he walked over because his phone was in the car. That was the whole issue. He grabbed his phone. He called 911. The business had a security guard, and he came over, took the gun from my client. They stayed on the scene, and he talked to police, and he walked them through everything. I get a call the next day, and he said, he explained to me what happened, and he wasn't sure what was going to happen. And he then gave me the number for the officers that he spoke with, and I called, and they said, "Listen, I'm sorry, we're going to be, the state is going to be filing attempted murder charges on your client." And that's when the case started. Luckily, we had some good evidence. We had security video. Of course, it's never as good as you want it to be. It was grainy. It was hard to see. And we're looking at a small pinhole looking out at a parking lot very far away. And it was kind of hard to tell. But like I said, Florida's got a good stand your ground law. And I felt very confident. It was it was 3 days. It was probably anywhere from 8 hours of testimony. And then the judge waited several months to actually give us a written order, and we lost. And I couldn't believe it. And I was confident. I felt very strong in everything because of what we just described to you. And there was some testimony that one of the eyewitnesses, who initially on scene said the car was going to effing kill my client. And that's, we thought that we had really good testimony there. But the judge said that this client's testimony, he switched it at the stand your ground to say, I think the car was gonna stop, and he discharged the firearm. So it left me in a pickle. Like, what do you do when you've lost your right to a stand your ground motion? That means it's going to have to go to a jury. I started doing background on the victim. The victim had just been discharged from a mental hospital because he had probably been Baker acted for taking a machete at a gas station and threatening people. By continuously showing the state really what had happened, we had a new prosecutor on the case. I think they saw it our way. And because my client did fire a warning shot, it was a discharge of a firearm. That's how it got to a misdemeanor, and that's how we got the case resolved. So it was a lot of work. And, what we do as criminal defense attorneys, we're not all Perry Mason. We don't have, not everybody's an innocent client. We're working for people who've made mistakes. We're working for people who've done the wrong things a lot of times. This was one of those cases where I felt we have an innocent person. We have someone who is in fear of their life. They have a law that stand your ground that supports them. And we lost. But then we had the opportunity, we could have taken it to trial. I think there was a heck of a lot more risk to take that case to trial than to get a misdemeanor, which then allowed it to be later sealed.
Wow, that's interesting. How you got it changed to a misdemeanor and then sealed completely.
Yeah.
So, in essence, it's not expunged from, or is from a practical standpoint,
So
expunged from his record. I mean, so that it's not.
sealed and expunged really work the same way. Expungement is actually the state, actually destroys the file. And so that is, that happens with expungement. With a seal, no one else can have access to it. Of course, federal government's going to have access. There's going to be certain entities that will always have access. So, those are, um, those are the considerations. But as far as I'm concerned, sealing and expungement are almost intertwinable.
So give me 1 second because my light is turned up and I look a little pasty. So I'm going to just make one little quick adjustment.
Sure.
I wouldn't say I look pretty, but okay. So you grew up in Moline, Illinois, wrestled at Indiana University, which I know to be a great program for that. You ended up practicing law in South Florida. How did you end up with that particular? You ended up in Florida from Indiana.
Sure. So, um, I loved my time at IU. I did apply to go to IU Law School. I didn't get in, but I ended up uh, looking at schools. My home state's Illinois, but my parents kind of became early snowbirds, and they loved Florida. Anybody from Illinois and Indiana, they go to the west coast of Florida. So I spent a lot of winters, down there visiting them, and ultimately my dad practiced law, and you know the initial thought was I was going to go practice with him, right? That's the kind of the default. And he's like, well, I don't really care where you go to law school. You just got to go to law school. And there were some options, in Florida. And I toured the schools and I liked them. I thought there's some good options. And I thought, well, my parents are going to be there anyway, at least be able to visit with them at that time and then have a little bit of fun before I get serious with my life. I got down there, and the first winter, I remember it was December and it's 70 degrees as I walked out of school at night. And I'm like, I'll never have to shovel snow again. Uh, that was kind of it. That's, that is what I tell everybody. The truth is that's a part of it. The reality is after my first year, I got a really great internship or, clerkship at a criminal defense firm in Miami. And being from a small town in Moline to work, in a larger city doing criminal defense, you know, the capital of the cocaine cowboys, it was an exciting thing to see. The first day I walked in, met with the partners. He had brought in a new client. I sat through the client interview. He dumped a bunch of cash down on. I was like, oh, so this is happening, and then everything kind of, rolled from there. And I was integral in like they threw me to the wolves right away, researching case law, entrapment motions, looking at you know, trying to get depositions done on misdemeanor cases. They were throwing me to do stuff that none of my other classmates were doing at that time. And I really liked it and I really enjoyed it. And so that was another key point to keep me in South Florida, is I liked doing that. And then the third is, ultimately after I graduated and I went to work for one of the partners of that firm, shortly thereafter I met my wife in Florida, and we've
And
built a family from there.
so that was it. Once
That
you
was
met
it.
the wife down there.
Yeah.
So you went at like 27 or 28. You decided you're going to go out and start your own firm. Is that right?
Yeah. So I kind of did something that I would never tell myself to do now. I did everything all at the same time. I got engaged. I started my own firm with only 2 years experience. And, I felt like I had outgrown my space at where I was. I saw an opportunity. There was another attorney nearby that said, hey, I'm a commercial litigator. I have an extra room. Good opportunity to exchange extra work for your own space. Thought, oh, I'll give this a shot, and I did, and that's how I kind of parlayed into that. So it was just myself, my cell phone, and a computer. I was getting a little overflow work to kind of put a little scratch in my pocket, and then I started building up my own cases. But it wasn't long after that where I was starting to build my own cases, and he realizes, hey, I kind of need more work from you. And I said, I'm busy here. So we mutually had to leave. Then I was back on my own again, and I had to figure out that. But yeah, I did it. I wish I had at the time a little bit more of a direction of what I really wanted to do. But hindsight's 2020. It's, 22 years ago or 23 years ago, I've embarked on this, and, we're doing pretty good right now.
So you say you don't do worst case scenarios to try to
Yeah.
get people into to hire you. So what do you do instead when you're talking to people to, you, it's, I don't know, as a criminal defense attorney, you do kind of, it's hard not to paint worst case scenarios, isn't it? To try to be frank with your clients, but at the same time, how do you handle an onboarding or kind of a vetting, so to speak, of a new client?
Yeah, well, so I hate doing the worst case scenario with somebody the first day, because if someone's asking me that question, I know that's where their mindset is. I have to know the worst case scenario. I don't like to be that guy that scares them into hiring me. That's the worst type of client to have, is a scared client. I want someone who trusts me. And what I tell them is simply this. By statute, this is the minimum, this is the maximum. Could it be dismissed? Sure. Could things get worse? Yes. But until I see any evidence, I'm not going to make any kind of judgment on that. I can read a police report all I want. Those are available in the clerk's office. You can tell me what happened. Those things don't always add up, right? That the what's written in the police report isn't what's on the body worn camera or the dash cam, and what the client says. If they don't add up, then it makes me think there's going to be more here to this, and then I can show them, hey, we got a process. We've got experience handling these types of cases, whether it's a DUI, whether it's a battery charge, trafficking, something like that. We can show and give some other examples, not saying, hey, this is going to be just like this case, but instead of focusing on what's the worst case scenario, let's focus on the next step. You eat the elephant by one bite at a time. So let's just start there. Let's just start with the first step, the second step, the third step, this right there. Let's not worry about the ending right now.
So you you give every client a free legal guide based upon their case type, basically like a crash course in their own situation. Where did that idea come from?
So, it I say in about 2015 or 16, I got connected with Ben Glass at Great Legal Marketing, and they had wonderful ideas. And one of them is you know what you're doing. Clients have questions. Write a book, write a guide, because when they see you have a guide to what it is they're looking for, you've now built trust, you've built authority, and it also is going to answer their questions. You might, the example I just gave you is that you don't want a scared client, but when someone's read your guide and they go, oh, I get it, this is the next step, this is what's going to happen. Now they've got some trust in you. They're not as scared. They're ready to, hear more from you. So I really got it from Ben Glass and Great Legal Marketing. Of course, he learned it from, I'm drawing a blank on his name. He's a major marketer focusing on direct mail, and I shouldn't, marketing. I'll think of it. We'll get back to you on it. But really, I attribute it all to Ben Glass and Great Legal Marketing.
I know that there's a couple of attorneys that I know that use a similar strategy in the Seattle area and have been really successful with that. So you now have expanded to two offices. You're in Palm Beach and Broward, or you're in two counties. What does that growth look like when you're a small firm competing with all the big ones?
It's when you're looking at criminal defense, I think you don't have to be everywhere at the same time. I started my practice, like I said, in Miami and then Fort Lauderdale, the Broward County area. And ultimately, when the family moved up to Palm Beach, I kept an office there because I knew I was going to have my old clients always, they needed to have a place to, still contact and meet with me. So that's kind of how we've operated with that. And the growth is really in Palm Beach County. We still have a lot of residual Broward and Dade County cases. I'm getting a lot of calls from the two counties north of us. I'm not ready to open an office quite yet there, but because we're able to service everything like we're doing now, Zoom, we use Filevine as our CRM and case management system, and Lead Docket to connect the dots for whether it's sign-ups or anything like that. So we, using technology to our advantage, we don't need to get necessarily physical offices quite yet at that time. So that's how we're kind of managing the growth. I don't anticipate going beyond, St. Lucie County down to Dade County, because I've seen too many lawyers in my area start taking cases across the state, and then they get sucked into something. They're a strange man in a strange land. And when you don't know the judges, the prosecutors, the law enforcements and the procedures, that's where you get into trouble.
Hmm. So, do you have any other associate lawyers that are also in your practice?
Not at the time I have, but I've, we're searching right now actively for an associate to take kind of the space that we need right now.
So, I have some rapid fire. These are always kind of fun. So, favorite wave you've ever surfed?
Well, I will tell you, we just got back from Costa Rica, and it's always fun surfing there. And just so you know, I didn't start surfing. Obviously, I'm from Illinois. I didn't start surfing till later in life. So I am, as much as I love it, I'm still such a novice, maybe broaching intermediate. But I would say Costa Rica. I did have, at our local spot in Jupiter, a few good ones here in the last year. So.
Last song you played on guitar?
Oh, I think I was just going back to Metallica's Fade to Black.
BJJ move that's most useful in courtroom metaphor.
Oh,
And explain that question so for
no,
people who don't know what the heck I'm talking about.
the guillotine, right? So the
Yeah.
guillotine is a choke. The guillotine is obviously in the olden days when they wanted to execute you, put your head in the vice and there went down the blade. So I guess that's metaphorically speaking the best one.
Wrestling move too.
Yes.
So, worst thing a client has said to a judge that made you cringe.
Okay, so this ties back to when I first started working. I was greener than green, and I was told to show up for an afternoon docket. Client needed a continuance. I couldn't find the client's name on the docket. I called out the name and called out the name because I couldn't. I was like, maybe I'm in the wrong spot. She showed up. She's like, oh, I said, well, I don't see your name on the docket. She goes, oh, it's under my other name. And then the case got called up. And before I could even introduce myself, she starts talking and apologizing to the judge about her behavior last time, which I knew nothing about. And I just felt I had no power, no control. I couldn't control my client. I couldn't do anything. And I'm wondering what the next words are going to be out of her mouth. And I'm going to kind of keep it tame and subtle. The judge had no problems with anything that she did or anything that happened, but I always was wondering what was she like the last time she was in before this judge. But it was cringing. I just felt like, oh, this is my worst nightmare. So
So, what does your daughter Jade think you do all day?
uh she knows I go to court. She knows that she doesn't understand that every day is not a trial. She knows I represent people. She knows I go to the jail. She knows that I actually get to come out of the jail. But yeah, to a certain degree, it's kind of like the same thing that people assume lawyers do all day. It's never what TV makes it to believe. It's never what you know, uh, what the public's perception is, right? So, as much as you know, everybody thinks all day long I'm either writing briefs or arguing motion. The truth is sometimes I'm doing a podcast. Sometimes I'm, doing some marketing. Sometimes I'm, looking at, projections of what next month is going to be, because I do operate a business. I'm a business owner as well as a lawyer.
Yeah, people forget that. So, South Florida Sun Sentinel featured you as in an investigative series on high-profile criminal cases in Palm Beach County. What was that like?
Well, so, you know, I've been called a couple times on a couple different issues that have come up lately. Florida, we have tons of Florida man stories. We have, obviously can be pretty divisive politics and some really weird archaic laws. And one of the ones that just recently came out was at the end of last year, they outlawed license plate covers that even if they're glass and you can see through them because it's reflective and it kind of messes with the license plate readers, which I think is a bigger issue. But the point is that it was already outlawed, but it was a civil traffic infraction, which was like just a ticket. But now it's criminal, and so people were getting arrested. There was a whole bunch of outrage when this started happening that the Department of Highway Safety and Motor Vehicles had to actually write a memo like saying, no, we don't want people arrested for this. It's just, do it this way. So already this law went into effect in October of 25. They're already starting to rewrite it. So there was a question about that. That was the last time I spoke with the Sun Sentinel. There was, another issue I was able to touch upon about some of the DUI cases. So
So there's around 30,000 DUI arrests in Florida every year. What's the biggest mistake people make in the first 24 hours after a DUI?
The first 24 hours it's kind of not writing everything down that happened, because that's when your memory is going to be freshest, especially if you're coming off a DUI where maybe you were intoxicated and you don't have that like it's going to be fuzzy. It's going to be fuzzy 6 months down the line or 10 months down the line when you're going to trial. Like, really, what did happen, or what do you specifically remember? I always tell people to write down everything that they can so that they can remember. Also, another issue is like getting to work on an action plan. So Florida requires you to do something about your license within 10 days or you lose a whole bunch of rights. Because when you blow over or refuse a breath test, you lose your license. So yes, you have 10 days to do it, but if you're not thinking about it the next day within 24 hours, what are you going to do? Because if you're going to go then look to hire lawyers, and then you're scheduling them out 2 or 3 days, and then you're making decisions, you're not thinking about that 10th day when you've blown your rights. So those are kinds of the things that happen right away that you need to think about, what should you be doing there?
So I see in here, and in our notes here too, that you also do some personal injury, and most attorneys don't do both. That's kind of a different kind of mix. Is how do you handle that, and what percentage of your cases are personal injury versus criminal cases?
So, we're about 3/4 to 2/3 criminal, about a quarter to 1/3. It just depends with personal injury. And really, what happened was, go back to what we already talked about when I first went to that firm right out of law school. One of the guys that I had been working with during law school, in the time that I was finishing up school, I wasn't working for him. I was doing my clinic at the public defender's office. So I had about 6 months where I wasn't working with them. So what happened was, when I took the job with them and worked the first day, I got handed a stack of files that goes, by the way, we do personal injury now, go learn it. I thought we were a criminal firm. Well, I didn't have a choice, so I learned it. I learned how to do it. The one thing I think is where these things interact, are we're representing individuals at a spot of their lowest moment. If someone's in an accident and is severely injured, even if they're minor, the injury's not that big, but it's still an injury. It affects their day, it affects their job, it affects their life at home. It physically hurts. When someone gets arrested, it affects their job, it affects their family. To a certain degree, it might physically hurt if you're mentally, anguishing over the situation. So I think there's a lot of tie-in of how to deal with the person individually. It's not like, and again, all respect to the lawyers that work in every different field, but when someone is defending a major company like Apple or something like this, no one's really upset at the end of the day if Apple gets affected a little bit. But when you get to the personal issue of how it affects their life, as you get to know them over time, it matters. And again, I just like helping people. So I do think that there's a connection. I think there's also a connection with, the Trial Lawyers Association, for us, the Florida Justice Association, the people that are involved in this organization, they're attorneys that like to go to trial. They like to be in the courtroom and work cases up. Similarly, as criminal defense attorneys, like, we love going to court. We love finding a unique issue and then just working those cases up, going to trial or getting the case dismissed. So there's a lot of that, high action, fast paced courtroom stuff that, there's that.
Do you think your wrestling background has something to do with that idea of kind of just being one on one versus
Absolutely. There's a mindset. You have to, you you step in, you step on the mat, it's just you versus him. And when you go into a courtroom, it is you versus the state, or you versus the defendant in a personal injury case. There's that mentality. It's you you don't have anybody to rely on to say, oh, it was his fault, or it was that person's fault, or this was wrong. It is what it is. And sometimes you are dealt with a bad hand. These aren't, it's not equal. No one's on an equal playing field in court. Someone's got more evidence, someone's got better evidence. We have certain bad facts. So you have to have that grind mentality, that you're okay. You're just going to do your best. You've trained for this, you've prepared, and you're just going to keep going. And yeah, I learned that in wrestling all those years ago.
Yeah, I'm with you there. Um, so you wrote this book called "My Loved One Has Been Arrested. What's Next?" Who's that really written for, and what should they do first?
So, I wrote it. It's really for the loved ones of people who've been arrested, because a lot of times I'm not getting called by the defendant. I'm being called by the loved ones. A lot of times the defendant's, one, either in jail, or two, they're kind of paralyzed by their situation. Now, I give that book to even my defendants, because it goes through. It goes through kind of what the process is, but it also gives like advice of what you can do, whether you are the defendant, whether you're the parent, or the loved one, or the spouse. It's really, we talk about what to do at the first 24 hours. It's kind of that. There's some self-assessment going on. Like, okay, you're in this situation, you have to move forward. Is there
Hmm.
something other than hiring an attorney that you can do for yourself? Listen, if you got a DUI and you're realizing, hey, my drinking's out of control, maybe it's time to, get some counseling. Maybe it's time to go to rehab. Maybe it's, you know, you have to have those hard conversations. We talk about that in there. We talk about how it's not going to hurt your case. No one can use that against, he went to rehab, he must have been drunk that night. No, it's mitigation. It's what, if you get found guilty, or you're trying to negotiate a plea, that you can show, hey, you're trying to do better, and this is why you deserve a break. So those are things in there. Simple other things that you're not supposed to do. Go on social media and start talking about everything. It's the ruin of our civilization, right? Everybody's got to either brag about it, or complain, or do this, but your words can be used against you.
So if someone just got watching this, just got arrested or just got hurt in an accident and they're panicked right now, what's the one thing that you would tell them?
Breathe. You're going to be, you're going to get through this one way or another. You want it to be the best way possible. So, take a breath. Don't panic. Don't start doing terrible things, whether it's self-harm, or cutting your loved ones off, or running away from the situation where you will ultimately get a warrant for missing court. You don't want to do that. You take a breath, do that self-assessment. What's going on here? How did I get here? What can I do? Who is my support system? Who can be there to help? Who have you helped in the past that you might turn around and say, hey, now I need your help, and this is where I'm at. Can we talk?
So you've been at this for 20 plus years. What's next on for you on the agenda? What do you see for yourself and your firm over the next, I don't know, 5 years or so?
Well, so as we're talking about this, we're getting ready to move. And so we're going to be in a better space, which is great. It's going to be close. We're just going across the street. Newer building, better building. I think it's going to be better for the staff. I really want, we talked about hiring an associate. We've got the ad out. I want to, um, I'm looking forward to bringing in somebody who kind of shares our vision. We're going to have some personnel change, and it's not for a bad thing; it's for a good thing. Some of our staff have been working with us for a while and are going to law school, so I'm going to have to replace them. But it's an exciting, change, because they're growing from where they were, and I love that. So, ultimately where I see is continuing to grow. Love to be able to help and teach someone younger than me to kind of do what I do, and, watch them flourish as well. So that's kind of the goal here for the next 5 years.
So I saw somewhere in here that you also do some training. You trained someone else at another law firm, or is can you talk about that a little bit?
Haven't so
Or you'd
I've
help
done some
someone at another
I've
law firm?
definitely done some mentoring. The Florida Bar has a mentor program. I thought that was such a wonderful opportunity. I think that was something that I really appreciated. I did do a CLE many years ago called the ABCs of Criminal Defense. I think somewhere you can still purchase that. I've done some speaking at Kaiser College. So, there's those aspects. I definitely would embrace more of those type of opportunities. You know, but I'm so the frustrating part is I'm still waiting on the mentor to the whatever, I can't think of the name of the Florida Bars program, but the that mentorship program. I'm waiting for a new mentee. So until then.
So if somebody has just got arrested or has some issue there and they're in South Florida, how do they reach your firm or download your free guide?
Sure. So, we're in Palm Beach County. My website, I try to make it easy. It's 561, like our area code law, 561law.com. If you've got a DUI issue, it's 561DUI.com. And our number is 561-671-5995. We have 24-hour answering service. My intake staff is excellent. They'll go through, get the most pertinent information, and then get you over to me so that we can, kind of dissect right away and, kind of get you placed in the right direction.
Okay, Matt, thanks a lot for coming on the show.